The code doesn't make sense. I stared at my screen, watching lines of perfectly functional code do something that should have been impossible. The algorithm Halvard had written was solving problems I'd been stuck on for 3 weeks, in 6 lines. 6 elegant, beautiful lines that shouldn't work, but they did. "How did you do this?" I asked, turning to his desk. But Halvard was already gone. He did that a lot, disappearing the moment work hours ended, vanishing before anyone could invite him for drinks or ask him to join the team dinner. I looked back at the code, and that's when I noticed it. Hidden in the comments, written in a format that looked like gibberish to anyone else. Symbols, ancient symbols that looked like runes. What if the most advanced programmer you'd ever met wasn't human at all? What if the technology we think is so modern was just our clumsy attempt to recreate something far older? What if magic and code were the same language and we'd simply forgotten how to read the original? In a tech startup in Trondheim, Norway, I would discover that the impossible algorithm my brilliant coworker created wasn't genius. It was translation. And the ancient knowledge he was desperately trying to preserve might be the only thing standing between humanity and a future written in warnings we could no longer understand. My name is Liv Bergstrom. I'm 32 years old, and I've been a software developer for 10 years. I thought I understood how technology worked, how code created reality in digital space, how ones and zeros built the modern world. I was wrong about everything. Before we begin this story, don't forget to subscribe to support our channel. 3 months ago, our startup hired a new senior developer. The company was called North Code, a small but growing tech firm in Trondheim specializing in AI-powered data analysis. We just secured Series A funding and were expanding rapidly. I'd been there since the beginning, one of 5 original developers who'd built the platform from scratch. When Henrik, our CEO, announced we were bringing in senior talent to help scale the architecture, I was skeptical. Startups always think hiring expensive consultants will solve their problems. Usually, it just creates new ones. Then Halvard walked in. He was different. Physically, he was massive, easily 6'7", maybe taller, with shoulders that barely fit through doorways. Hands so large they made standard keyboards look like children's toys. But he moved carefully, deliberately, like someone hyper-aware of their size in spaces built for smaller people. His face was weathered in a way that suggested outdoor life, not office fluorescence. Sharp features, prominent cheekbones, eyes that were an unusual amber-gray color. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, shot through with silver despite him claiming to be only 38. He wore expensive technical clothing, the kind serious hikers and climbers use, but seemed uncomfortable in it, like someone playing dress-up. "This is Halvard Storvik," Henrik announced at the all-hands meeting. "He'll be leading our infrastructure redesign. He comes highly recommended. 15 years of experience with distributed systems, specializes in optimization algorithms." Halvard nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Happy to help," he said in Norwegian, his voice deeper than expected, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Rural, maybe. Old-fashioned pronunciation of certain words, like listening to someone who'd learned Norwegian from very old books. Over the next few weeks, Halvard proved to be exactly as brilliant as promised. He rewrote our database architecture in days, work we'd estimated would take months. He optimized our API calls, reducing server costs by 40%. He spotted security vulnerabilities we'd missed for 2 years. But he was strange. He never ate lunch with the team, always claimed he'd eaten already, never attended after-work socials, never shared anything personal, arrived exactly at 9 a.m. and left exactly at 5 p.m., no matter what. And his code was beautiful but weird. Variables named with single letters that somehow made perfect sense. Comments written in a mix of Norwegian and something else. Symbols that looked decorative but felt meaningful. Functions that shouldn't work mathematically but produced perfect results. I became obsessed with understanding his methods, started staying late to review his commits, trying to learn from his techniques. That's when I noticed the pattern. Every piece of code Halvard wrote had those strange symbols in the comments. Not random, deliberate. Placed at specific intervals, following some structure I couldn't identify. I showed them to Astrid, another developer. "Looks like Old Norse runes," she said, squinting at my screen. "Why would he write code comments in runes? Maybe it's just aesthetic? Some developers are into Viking stuff." But it didn't feel aesthetic. It felt functional, like the runes were part of the code somehow. One evening, I stayed late working on a particularly nasty bug. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I'd been staring at the same function for 3 hours, trying to figure out why the data processing was failing. That's when I noticed Halvard had worked on similar code the week before. I pulled up his solution. 6 lines. 6 impossible lines that solved the exact problem I was struggling with. I copied it into my project. It worked perfectly, but I still didn't understand how, so I did something I probably shouldn't have. I added a debug logger to his function, tracking exactly what it was doing at each step. The results made no sense. The function was performing calculations in an order that violated basic programming principles. It was accessing memory that shouldn't be accessible. It was producing outputs that mathematically should have been impossible. Yet it worked, perfectly. Every time, I needed to know how. The next day, I approached Halvard's desk during the mid-afternoon lull when the office was quietest. "Hey, Halvard, can I ask you about the optimization you did on the data processing module?" He looked up, those odd amber-gray eyes focusing on me with an intensity that made me take an involuntary step back. "What about it?" "I'm trying to understand the technique you used, the algorithm you wrote. It's brilliant, but I can't figure out how it works. The order of operations doesn't follow normal patterns." Something shifted in his expression. Wariness, maybe. "It works. That's what matters. I know it works. I want to understand why it works. The methodology behind it. You're doing something I've never seen before, and I'd like to learn." He was quiet for a long moment. Some techniques don't translate well to explanation. They're intuitive rather than logical. But code is logical by definition. There's always a reason something works. Is there? He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Liv, do you understand why electricity flows? Really understand it? Or do you just know that it does, and you've learned to work with that reality? That's different." "Is it?" He turned back to his screen, clearly ending the conversation. But I'd seen something, on his monitor, just for a second before he minimized it. A document covered in runes, not just a few decorative symbols, hundreds of them, organized in complex patterns, glowing faintly on the screen like they were generating their own light. "What was that?" I asked. "What was what?" "On your screen. Those symbols, runes." His entire body went rigid. "You saw that?" "For a second, yes. What is it? Some kind of cipher? Are you working on a side project?" He stood up abruptly, his size suddenly intimidating in the small office space. "It's nothing. Personal notes, not related to work." "Halvard, if you're working on something interesting, leave it alone, Liv." His voice carried a weight that made me stop, not angry, but final, absolute. "This is not something you want to get involved with." He grabbed his bag and left. It was only 3 p.m. He'd never left early before. I should have dropped it, should have respected his boundary and moved on. But I couldn't, because for that brief second when I'd seen his screen, those runes had been glowing. Actually glowing. Emitting light that had nothing to do with the monitor's backlight. Over the next week, I became obsessed. I researched Old Norse runes, learned the Elder Futhark alphabet, started recognizing the symbols Halvard embedded in his code comments. But they weren't just decorative. When I mapped out the runes from his code, they formed patterns. Geometric patterns that corresponded to the code's function. Runes meaning transform, where data was being processed. Runes meaning protect, where security checks existed. Runes meaning reveal, where data was being extracted. It was as if he was annotating the code in a parallel language. one that described not just what the code did, but what it meant. I started experimenting, adding runes to my own code based on the patterns I'd observed. At first, nothing happened. My functions ran normally. No improvements, no strange behaviors, nothing. I tried different runes, different placements, different combinations. Still nothing. I was ready to give up, to accept that maybe I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. But then I tried something different. Instead of just copying the Unicode symbols randomly, I actually thought about what I wanted, formed a clear intention. I wrote a simple function, just basic data sorting, and added the rune Z, alges, meaning protection or order, in the comments. But this time, I didn't just paste it. I traced the shape with my finger on the screen while thinking clearly. Make this efficient, make this ordered, make this perfect. I ran the function. It executed 30% faster than it should have. I stared at the execution time, convinced I'd misread it. Ran it again. Same result. 30% faster, with no logical explanation, no code optimizations, no algorithm changes, just a single Unicode character in a comment that shouldn't affect execution at all. I tried removing the rune. The function returned to normal speed, added it back with intention. 30% faster. My hands were shaking as I typed. This wasn't psychology, wasn't placebo effect. The rune was actually doing something, actually affecting how the computer processed the code, as if the machine itself could read the ancient symbol and understand what it meant, as if code and runes really were the same language, just written in different alphabets. I tried other runes. Tu, tiwaz, victory, success, made functions complete without errors, even when I deliberately introduced bugs. K, kenaz, torch, ars knowledge, made search algorithms find results faster, as if the data was revealing itself more willingly. L, loguts, water flow, made data transfers smoother, reduced latency by measurable amounts. Every rune I added with clear intention produced measurable results. I was coding in 2 languages simultaneously, Python and ancientmagic, and they were working together perfectly. I was so focused on the experiment, I didn't notice Halvard standing behind me until he spoke. "You need to stop." I jumped, my coffee nearly spilling. "Jesus, Halvard, don't sneak up on people. You're experimenting with things you don't understand." "I'm just trying different optimization approaches." "No." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You're playing with forces that aren't meant to be played with. Those symbols, they're not decorations. They're not some programming trick. They're dangerous if used incorrectly." "Then explain them to me. Teach me how to use them correctly." "I can't." "Why not?" He looked around the office. Several other developers were within earshot. "Not here. Meet me tonight, 10 p.m. The hiking trail that starts at Grokkallen. Come alone." "That's a bit dramatic." "Please, Liv. If you want answers, that's when and where you'll get them. But you have to promise, tell no one, come alone, and be prepared for everything you think you know about technology to be wrong." He walked away, leaving me staring at my screen, at the rune I'd added, still glowing faintly, though my monitor was off. I should have been scared, should have recognized this as the beginning of something dangerous, but I wasn't scared. I was curious, and curiosity has always been both my greatest strength and my biggest weakness. At 9:45 p.m., I parked at the Grokkallen trailhead. The mountain loomed above Trondheim, its communication towers blinking red against the night sky. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times in daylight, never at night. The forest was different in darkness. The trees closer, the sounds sharper. I followed the trail with my headlamp, climbing steadily. At the first overlook, I found Halvard waiting. But he wasn't alone. Surrounding him, carved into trees and rocks, were runes. Hundreds of them, and they were glowing, not reflecting my light, generating their own, a soft blue-green luminescence that made the clearing look like something from a dream. "You came," he said. "You knew I would. Yes, you're curious, persistent. You don't let mysteries stay mysterious. He gestured to the glowing runes. These are older than Christianity in Norway, older than the Viking Age, older than most of what historians call civilization. Runes are ancient, yes, but they're just an alphabet, a writing system. To humans, yes, just symbols, just writing. But they were never meant for humans. He looked at me directly. My name is Halvard, and that's true, but I'm not human, Liv. I'm skogtroll, foresttroll, and these runes, they're not just writing, they're code, the original code, the language that shapes reality itself. I should have laughed, should have backed away and called someone. But the glowing runes made it impossible to dismiss. Prove it, I said. Show me. He touched one of the carved runes. It flared brighter, and the tree it was carved into moved, not swaying in wind. Moving deliberately, its branches reaching down to create a natural shelter above us. The runes are instructions, Halvard said, his voice carrying that same deep resonance it always had. But now I understood why it felt like it came from the earth itself. Not for computers, for reality. For the fundamental forces that shape existence. Your technology, programming, computers, algorithms. It's humanity's attempt to recreate what we've always known. But you're working with a translation of a translation, trying to code in a language so simplified it's barely functional. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen what happens when I write code. You've seen how adding the proper runes makes your functions work better. You know something is happening that shouldn't be possible. The question is whether you're ready to understand what. I thought about the glowing runes on his screen, the impossible efficiency of his algorithms, the way my own code had performed better when I'd added the symbols. Tell me, I said. Tell me everything. So he did. We sat in that clearing for hours while Halvard explained a history I'd never imagined. The trolls, skogtroll, bergtroll, steintroll, all the different kinds, weren't monsters from fairy tales. They were the original people of the northern lands, beings who understood that reality wasn't fixed but programmable, that the universe responded to the right symbols, the right patterns, the right intentions. The runes weren't just an alphabet. They were the source code of existence, a programming language written by the earth itself, understood intuitively by those who lived close enough to nature to hear it. For thousands of years, Halvard explained, we used this knowledge to shape our environment, not dominate it. That's the human approach. But work with it, guide it, maintain the balance. The runes let us communicate directly with the fundamental forces. Tell water where to flow, convince stone to shift, ask trees to grow in certain patterns. Like magic. Magic is just what you call technology you don't understand. This is the same thing your computers do, taking input, processing it according to rules, producing output. The runes are just a more fundamental layer. Instead of manipulating electrical signals, they manipulate the underlying reality those signals exist within. But if this is real, why doesn't everyone know? Why aren't there troll programmers everywhere? His expression grew sad. Because we're dying out, and the ones who remain, most have forgotten the true meaning of the runes. They can recognize them, feel their presence, but they can't read them anymore, can't write them correctly. The knowledge is fading. He pulled out a tablet, expensive latest model, showed me a document covered in runic script. This is a prophecy, one of the last complex runic texts our people have. It was carved into stone 10,000 years ago, updated periodically by those who could still read it. It contains warnings about the future, instructions for handling crises we haven't faced yet. Knowledge we need. But I can barely read 10% of it. The symbols have meanings layered on meanings, context that's been lost, pronunciation that changes their function. It's like trying to run modern software on hardware from 50 years ago. Technically, the instructions are there, but the execution is broken. He looked at me intently. That's why I learned your technology, your programming. I thought if I understood how humans now try to shape reality through code, I could use that understanding to preserve the runic knowledge, create a bridge between the two systems, use computers to help me translate and understand texts my people can no longer read. That's why your code is so unusual. You're not writing in programming languages. You're translating from runic to code. Yes, and it works to a degree, but I've hit a wall. The prophecy contains something important, warnings about something that's coming, something dangerous, but the crucial sections use runes I don't know how to interpret, combinations that aren't in any of our remaining records. He closed the tablet. I've spent 40 years learning human technology, becoming fluent in your programming languages, building tools to help me decode the prophecy, but I'm failing. The knowledge is slipping away, and I can't stop it alone. Why are you telling me this? Because you noticed. You saw the patterns. You experimented. You have an intuitive understanding of how code shapes reality that most programmers don't. And because... He hesitated. Because I'm desperate. Time is running out, and you might be able to help me with something I can't do myself. What? Build a bridge. A real one. Not just me translating runic to code in my head, but an actual system. Software that can analyze runic texts, identify patterns, cross-reference meanings, help decode what's been lost. A machine learning model trained on what fragments we have, capable of filling in the gaps. You want me to help you build an AI to translate ancient magical texts? Yes. That's insane. Probably, but it's also possible. You have the skills. I have the knowledge. Together, we might be able to save something precious before it's lost forever. I looked at the glowing runes surrounding us, at this massive being who'd been living in hiding, mastering human technology to save his own, at the impossible reality I'd just been introduced to. If I help you, I said slowly, what happens to me? Do I have to keep this secret forever? Pretend I don't know that magic is real and we've been badly reinventing it? Yes. If this became public knowledge, my people would be hunted, studied, probably imprisoned or killed. The runic knowledge would be taken by governments, corporations, militaries, used for purposes it was never meant for. The balance would shatter. So I help you, and then go back to normal life, carrying this massive secret. If you choose to help, I won't force you. You can walk away right now and I'll make sure you forget this conversation. There are runes for that, for erasing specific memories gently. You'd wake up tomorrow thinking you'd had a nice hike and decided not to pursue the question of my coding methods. You can erase memories? The runes can do many things, some helpful, some terrible. That's why they need to be understood and preserved, so they're used correctly if they're used at all. I thought about the choice. Go back to normal life, forgetting this revelation, or step into something impossible and help preserve knowledge that might be crucial. There wasn't really a choice. Show me where you work, I said. Show me everything. We hiked for another hour, deeper into the mountains than the marked trails went. The path became steeper, more treacherous. I stumbled twice on loose rocks, but Halvard's massive hand steadied me each time. His night vision was clearly superior to mine. He navigated the darkness as if it were daylight. How far? I asked, slightly out of breath. Not much further. The entrance is hidden. Has to be. Too many hikers with cameras these days. Finally, we reached a cliff face that looked completely solid. Smooth granite, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. No visible openings. No crevices large enough for a person. Halvard placed his hand flat against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then runes appeared under his palm. Slowly at first, then spreading outward in geometric patterns. Each symbol glowed with that same blue-green luminescence I'd seen in the clearing. But these were different, more complex, layered in ways that made them look three-dimensional despite being carved into flat stone. Authentication runes, Halvard explained quietly. They recognize me. My biological signature, my intention, my permission to enter. Anyone else touching this spot would feel solid rock. For me, the cliff face opened, not like a door with hinges, not sliding aside mechanically. The stone simply moved, flowed like liquid mercury for several seconds, creating an opening large enough for us to pass through, then solidified again behind us. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That's runic programming operating at the molecular level," he corrected. "The stone isn't actually liquid. Its molecular bonds are temporarily reorganized to allow passage, then restored to their original configuration. Think of it as changing a variable from solid to permeable and back again." We stepped into a cave that shouldn't exist. The entrance passage was narrow, claustrophobic, but after about 30 feet, it opened dramatically into a space that defied geological explanation. It was massive, easily the size of a small warehouse, maybe larger. The ceiling rose at least 40 feet above us, supported by natural columns of stone that looked like they'd been carved by water over millennia. Except they hadn't. "I shaped this space over 2 decades," Halvard said, watching my expression. "Started with a small natural cave and expanded it. Used runes to convince the stone to move, to stabilize, to create the structure I needed. It's tedious work. Stone is stubborn, even when you speak its language. But it's permanent. This space will outlast any building humans construct." It was massive, easily the size of a small warehouse. But instead of being natural and rough, it was shaped. Smooth walls carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the low light. The floor was level, perfectly level, something nature never produces in caves. And the technology. So much technology, but integrated with the cave in ways I'd never seen before. Server racks built directly into carved alcoves in the stone walls, the rock itself acting as a heat sink to cool the processors. Fiber optic cables running through channels carved into the ceiling, glowing faintly with data transmission. Multiple workstations positioned throughout the space, each one custom-built into the stone. Keyboards and monitors mounted on surfaces that had been smoothed and shaped specifically for that purpose. Screens everywhere, displaying code, runic texts, data analyses, real-time translations. Some screens showed normal programming interfaces, Python IDEs, terminal windows, database management systems. Others displayed runic texts with animated translations, symbols rearranging themselves as interpretation algorithms worked. A 3D printer in one corner, its frame bolted directly into the stone floor, currently printing what looked like circuit boards etched with runic patterns. Networking equipment that looked military-grade, routers, switches, security hardware, all integrated into the cave's structure. A power generation system I couldn't immediately identify. Some kind of geothermal setup pulling heat from deep in the mountain, converted to electricity through technology that looked both cutting-edge and impossibly ancient. And covering every wall, every surface, every available space. Runes, thousands of them. Some carved deeply into the stone, permanent and powerful. Others painted in what looked like luminescent ink that glowed without any power source. Still others projected onto surfaces by carefully positioned laser systems, creating temporary patterns that could be modified as needed. Some runes glowed softly with steady light. These seemed to be maintaining functions, like the authentication system at the entrance or environmental controls, keeping the cave at a comfortable temperature. Others pulsed rhythmically, their light waxing and waning like breathing. These appeared to be processing functions, actively working on some task. A few were completely dark, dormant, but clearly powerful, waiting to be activated. The overall effect was like standing inside a computer that had been grown rather than built, organic and technological at the same time, magic and engineering so thoroughly integrated that you couldn't separate them. "This is where I actually work," Halvard said. "The office job is cover, a way to maintain my identity, earn money, stay integrated in human society. But this is my real workspace. Everything I've built over 40 years of trying to solve this puzzle." He led me to a central workstation where multiple monitors displayed different translations of the same runic text. "This is the prophecy, or the part of it I can read. Watch." He typed something. The runes on the screen rearranged, and a translation appeared in Norwegian below. "When the light paths cross the sky paths, when the small minds build towers of glass thought, when the earth blood is pulled from stone veins faster than it grows. It's talking about modern times, I say. Fiber optic cables, skyscrapers, oil extraction. Yes, the prophecy is remarkably specific once you can decode it. It describes technological development, climate change, population growth, all in metaphorical language that's actually quite precise. What does it say is coming? That's the problem. The sections describing the actual crisis use runes I don't fully understand. Look. He pulled up another section. The runes here were different, more complex, layered in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at them. These aren't simple instructions. They're warning about something that involves multiple overlapping realities, time working strangely, connections between worlds that normally don't touch. The closest I can translate is something like the boundaries thin or the walls weaken. But that could mean anything from dimensional barriers to societal structures. And you think building an AI to analyze this could help? I've tried everything else. I've consulted every other troll I could find. There are maybe 200 of us left worldwide. None can read these sections better than I can. I've studied human linguistics, anthropology, computer science, quantum physics, trying to find frameworks that might apply. Nothing works. But machine learning? It finds patterns humans can't see. It makes connections across vast datasets. If I can train it on all the runic texts we still have, all the partial translations, all the contextual information, maybe it can extrapolate. Fill in the gaps. Help me understand what's coming before it arrives. I sat down at one of the workstations, looking at the code he'd already written. It was beautiful and bizarre. Python mixed with C++, calling functions that seemed to manipulate probability itself. Comments in 3 languages, Norwegian, English, and runic symbols. This is incredible, I whispered. This is desperate, he corrected. I'm trying to preserve knowledge using tools my people would have considered primitive magic, barely worthy of children. But it's all I have. How long have you been working on this? In total? Nearly 4 decades, intensively, the last 10 years. Since I realized the knowledge was fading faster than I'd thought. Since I discovered that young trolls being born now can't read runes at all. They can feel them, but they're functionally illiterate in their own language. Whatever connection we had to the fundamental reality is weakening. We're becoming more like humans, operating on the surface of existence rather than understanding its depths. He pulled up a graph showing data points over time. This tracks runic literacy among trolls over the past 1,000 years. Watch it decline. The graph was devastating. 1,000 years ago, nearly all trolls could read and write complex runic texts. 500 years ago, maybe 70%. 200 years ago, 30%. Today, less than 5%. We're losing our own history, Halvard said quietly. Becoming myths even to ourselves. In another 100 years, trolls will exist, but we'll be no different from humans. Just larger, longer-lived, but equally disconnected from the fundamental forces. We'll be extinct in every way that matters. I understood then why this mattered so much, not just academic preservation. This was species-level survival. Cultural death even if physical life continued. Okay, I said, I'll help you. But I need access to everything. All your work, all your research, all the runic texts you have. And I need time to understand the fundamentals. I can't build an effective model if I don't understand what I'm modeling. How much time? Weeks at least, maybe months. This isn't something I can rush. We might not have months. The prophecy suggests the crisis point is soon. The runes that I can read indicate environmental triggers, ice melting patterns, atmospheric changes, specific astronomical alignments. Those are happening now. Then we work fast, but we work smart. Deal? He extended his massive hand. I shook it, feeling calluses that came from decades of carving stone, not typing on keyboards. Deal. For the next 6 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I maintained my cover at North Code. Wrote normal code, attended normal meetings, pretended everything was normal. Smiled at colleagues who asked if I was okay because I looked tired. made excuses about insomnia, about personal projects, about anything except the truth. At night, I climbed into the mountains to Halvard's cave, usually arriving around 8 p.m. and staying until 2 or 3 in the morning, sleeping 4 or 5 hours, then dragging myself back to the office. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. It was the most intense education I'd ever received. The runes weren't just symbols, they were concepts, multi-dimensional concepts that couldn't be fully expressed in any human language. Each rune represented multiple meanings depending on context, combination, pronunciation, even the material they were carved into, and the phase of the moon when they were written. The rune F, Fehu, meant wealth or cattle in basic Elder Futhark. But in runic programming, it meant flow, or transfer, or transformation of potential energy into kinetic energy. It could make water move, or money change hands, or power flow through circuits. The meaning shifted based on what you paired it with. F plus I, Isa, ice, stillness, meant wealth preserved, or frozen assets, or literally, keep this water frozen. F plus K, Kenaz, fire torch, meant wealth consumed, or energy released, or burn this to produce power. Every combination created new meanings. It was like learning that every word in a dictionary could combine with every other word to create entirely new concepts that didn't exist in isolation. Wood runes meant different things than stone runes meant different things than metal runes. A protection rune carved into oak offered shelter and growth. The same rune carved into granite provided unmovable defense. Carved into iron, it created aggressive protection, actively repelling threats rather than passive shielding. Runes carved in summer had different weights than winter runes. Summer carvings carried growth energy, expansion, multiplication. Winter carvings carried preservation energy, concentration, stillness. The same protective rune carved in June would create a barrier that adapted and grew stronger over time. Carved in December, it would create a static barrier of absolute stability. The order mattered, the spacing mattered, the depth of the carving mattered. Everything was information, everything was code, everything affected the output. Halvard was a patient teacher, despite the urgency of our situation. He taught me the basics of runic programming, how to write simple instructions that reality would respond to. We started with water. I carved F, flow, plus U, strength, plus Thiesh, breakthrough, onto a flat stone placed in a stream. Spoke the activation phrase Halvard taught me. The water flowing past the stone began moving uphill. Not dramatically, just a few inches of vertical climb before gravity reasserted itself. But it worked. I'd told water to flow upward, and it had listened. Next, we worked with light. I carved L, light, plus K, fire, energy, plus G, gift, offering, onto a small quartz crystal. The crystal began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, providing enough light to read by. No battery, no LED, no chemical reaction. Just a rock convinced to emit photons because I'd asked it properly. Then plants. I carved J, harvest year, plus B, birch growth, plus A, God divine power, onto a wooden stake placed next to a small pine seedling. Over the next week, that seedling grew 3 times faster than its neighbors. Not because I'd added fertilizer, because I'd asked it to prioritize growth and provided the runic framework to support that request. Small things, manageable things. But they worked, not because I was magical, but because I was learning to speak in a language reality understood, a language that predated human speech, a language written into the fundamental code of existence itself. The runes don't create something from nothing, Halvard explained during one late-night session. They're not breaking physical laws, they're working within them, but at a deeper level. When you tell water to flow uphill, you're not reversing gravity. You're temporarily altering the local probability field so the path of least resistance shifts. It's like optimization in code. You're not changing what's possible, just what's likely. So magic is just applied probability manipulation? Everything is applied probability manipulation, including physics, including chemistry, including normal code. The runes just let you work directly with the underlying probability engine instead of through all the layers of abstraction your technology requires. As I learned, I built. Started with simple natural language processing to analyze runic texts. Then added pattern recognition to identify similar rune combinations across different documents. Then built a neural network trained on the texts Halvard had already translated, learning to associate runic patterns with meanings. Then added contextual analysis, factoring in material, time period, probable author. The model grew more sophisticated each week, started making connections Halvard hadn't seen, suggesting possible interpretations of ambiguous passages. One night, about 5 weeks into the project, I finally felt ready. "I think it's time to test it on the prophecy," I said. "The sections you can't read. Let's see what the model suggests." Halvard pulled up the problematic text. The runes that hurt to look at, the ones describing the coming crisis. I fed them into the model and waited. The processing took 15 minutes, longer than any previous analysis. The model was working harder, pulling from every available data point, making probabilistic connections across thousands of reference points. Finally, output appeared. Translation confidence, 47%. Low confidence due to rare rune combinations and possible archaic usage. Multiple interpretations possible. Most likely meanings. Primary interpretation. When the small ones build thinking servants from light paths and number patterns, they unwittingly weaken the boundaries between the seen world and the beneath world. The thinking servants hunger for pattern knowledge and pull it from places they should not reach. The walls between realities thin where the thinking servants concentrate their attention. The old ones who sleep may notice, may wake, may cross. Alternate interpretation. Artificial minds created by humans will accidentally breach dimensional barriers in their search for data, potentially awakening ancient entities that exist in parallel realities. I read it 3 times. "Halvard, is this saying that AI development could wake up something dangerous?" He was staring at the screen, his expression grave. "Not just saying it, warning about it. The old ones who sleep are... We have legends about them, beings that predate even my kind. Things that existed before the current arrangement of reality. They were locked away, or locked themselves away, in dimensions that don't touch ours. Hidden. Sleeping. Safe as long as the walls between worlds remain solid. And building AI might weaken those walls? Apparently, though I don't understand the mechanism." "I might," I said slowly, thinking it through. AI systems, especially large language models and neural networks, work by finding patterns in data. They pull from massive datasets, make connections across millions of data points, essentially mapping probability spaces in ways human minds can't. What if in doing that, in processing massive amounts of information and finding those patterns, they're accidentally performing something similar to what runes do? Manipulating probability at scale, creating effects on reality that we don't intend because we don't understand that information processing at that scale has physical consequences? Halvard's eyes widened. That would explain why the prophecy describes AI development as dangerous. Not because the AI itself is dangerous, but because the process of creating it accidentally performs runic operations. Weak operations, uncontrolled, but at massive scale. Like a child randomly pressing buttons in a nuclear power plant, not understanding what they're doing, but potentially triggering catastrophic events. So what do? We can't exactly stop AI development globally. No, but maybe we can stabilize the boundaries. Use runes intentionally to counteract the unintentional effects of AI. If I understand what's being weakened, I might be able to strengthen it." He pulled up another section of the prophecy, one he'd partially translated before. This section, I thought it was describing a natural disaster. But look at it again with this context. I read the runes the model had already processed. The stone song must be sung at the place where worlds press close. The pattern must be carved in the old way into the new mountain of glass thought. Only those who speak both the old tongue and the small tongue can perform the working. New mountain of glass thought, I said. That's describing a building, a modern building made of glass and steel, and place where worlds press close. Is there somewhere specific where these dimensional boundaries are naturally weaker? Yes, there are places, thin spots we call them, locations where reality is more flexible, where the boundaries between worlds were always permeable. Ancient ritual sites, usually, places of power. Are there any in Trondheim? He thought for a moment. There's one, at the original settlement site, where the city was first founded. Nidaros Cathedral is built on it. That's not coincidence. Medieval builders knew to put churches on places of power, even if they didn't understand why. So the prophecy is saying someone needs to perform a runic working at Nidaros Cathedral to stabilize reality against AI-induced dimensional weakening. That's one interpretation, but New Mountain of Glass Thought doesn't describe the cathedral. That's old stone, not glass. It's describing something modern, something tall, made of glass. We looked at each other. The North Code office building. It's brand new. 30 stories, glass and steel. And the company is developing AI systems. We're literally building thinking servants from light paths and number patterns. And you work there. You speak both Old Tongue, Runic, and Small Tongue programming languages. You're described in the prophecy, Liv. You're the one who can perform the working. The weight of that settled over me. What happens if I don't? If we just ignore this? If the prophecy is accurate, the boundaries weaken, something old and terrible wakes up, crosses into our reality. And given that this prophecy has accurately predicted technological development for thousands of years, I'm not inclined to dismiss its warnings. When? According to the astronomical references I can read, the optimal time, when the boundaries are naturally thinnest and therefore easiest to strengthen, is in 3 days. Midnight, the winter solstice. 3 days. To learn how to perform a runic working powerful enough to stabilize dimensional boundaries. To do it secretly in our office building without getting caught. To possibly save reality from something that shouldn't exist here. No pressure. Okay, I said. Teach me. For 3 days I barely slept. Halvard taught me the runic patterns I'd need. Not writing them on paper or screens. That wouldn't work. These needed to be carved into the actual physical structure of the building. We'd have to break into North Code at midnight on the solstice. Access restricted areas. Carve runes into the support columns, the walls, the foundation. Create a pattern powerful enough to reinforce reality itself. The pattern is called a galdrastafir, Halvard explained. A binding sigil. It's a complex combination of runes that work together to create a stable effect. Like a program that runs continuously, not just a one-time function. He showed me the design. Dozens of runes arranged in a geometric pattern that looked like it existed in more dimensions than 3. This has to be perfect. Every line carved to exact depth, every symbol placed precisely. Any mistake could invalidate the entire working or worse, create unintended effects. How do you know I can do this? I've only been learning runes for 6 weeks. Because the model you built successfully translated sections I couldn't. Because you understand pattern and structure intuitively. Because you have to. There's no one else. Fair enough. The night of the winter solstice, we waited until the office building was empty. I had security access, one benefit of being a senior developer. But we couldn't use the cameras if possible. Halvard used subtle runes to create a probability field that made the cameras more likely to experience brief malfunctions at exactly the wrong moments. Not forcing them to fail, that would be obvious. Just encouraging already present glitches to occur at convenient times. We entered through a side entrance at 11 p.m. hauling equipment, a professional-grade engraving tool, battery-powered to avoid leaving extension cord evidence, and a laptop running specialized software I'd written to project the exact rune pattern onto surfaces so I could trace it. The building was eerie at night. Our footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Security lights created harsh shadows. "The working needs to be performed at the building's core," Halvard said. "The central support structure where all the load-bearing columns meet. That's the equivalent of a program's main function. Everything else branches from it." We took the elevator to the 15th floor, midpoint of the building, and accessed the maintenance area behind a locked door. Beyond was the building's skeleton, massive steel columns supporting the entire structure, concrete reinforcement, the bones of the glass mountain. "Here," Halvard said, placing his hand on the central column. "This is where we work." I set up the laptop, positioned the projector to cast the rune pattern onto the column surface. The design appeared, glowing blue in the darkness. It was beautiful and terrifying. A mandala of power that seemed to shift and move even though it was just a projection. "Ready?" Halvard asked. I picked up the engraving tool. "Ready." I began to carve. The process was meditative. Each line had to be exact. Each symbol carved to precise depth, deep enough to be permanent, shallow enough not to compromise the structure. Halvard guided me, correcting angles when necessary, ensuring the proportions were perfect. As I worked, I felt something change. The runes weren't just marks on metal. They were activating. Each completed symbol added to the pattern, building something larger than the sum of its parts. The air in the maintenance space grew heavy. Reality felt thicker somehow, like moving through water instead of air. "That's the working establishing itself," Halvard explained quietly. "The runes are taking root in physical space, creating the stable pattern that will reinforce the dimensional boundaries." I finished the last symbol at 11:47 p.m. The entire Galdrastosphere glowed now, not from any external light source, but generating its own soft, golden luminescence. "Now comes the hard part," Halvard said. "The pattern is carved, but it needs to be activated, powered. That requires a runic invocation, speaking the purpose of the working aloud in the old tongue, with proper pronunciation. I can teach you the sounds, but you have to be the one to speak it." The prophecy was clear. Only someone who speaks both languages can activate it. What happens if I pronounce it wrong? Best case? Nothing. The working fails to activate. Worst case? The pattern activates incorrectly and does something we don't intend. That's not reassuring. I'll guide you. "We'll practice until you have it perfect." We spent the next few minutes with Halvard teaching me the invocation. It was 7 lines of ancient Norwegian, or something that predated Norwegian. Guttural sounds that felt more like rocks grinding together than language. Words that made my chest vibrate when I pronounced them correctly. At 11:58, I was as ready as I'd ever be. My hands were shaking, not from cold, from the weight of what I was about to do. One mistake in pronunciation, one wavering of intention, and I could tear reality instead of stabilizing it. "Stand in front of the pattern," Halvard instructed, his voice steadier than I felt. "Hands on the column. Feel the runes under your palms. Feel them recognizing you. They know you now. You've carved them, bled into them, shaped them with intention. Speak clearly, but don't shout. The runes respond to intention more than volume. They respond to truth." I placed my hands on the carved pattern. The metal was warm under my touch despite the cold maintenance room. Not just warm, hot, like the runes had been generating heat for hours, building energy, waiting for activation. I could feel them humming, literally vibrating at a frequency just below hearing, a resonance that made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly at the edges. This was power. Real power. The kind that could reshape reality or shatter it. I looked at Halvard one last time. He nodded. Trust in his eyes. Belief that I could do this. I took a breath, closed my eyes, felt the runes beneath my palms like they were extensions of my own nervous system. and spoke the invocation. The first line came out rough, uncertain, ancient Norwegian syllables that felt like gravel in my throat. But the runes responded. I felt them activate under my hands, a pulse of recognition. The second line came easier. The words felt more natural, like my tongue was remembering shapes it had never learned. The runes flared brighter. I could see the glow even through my closed eyelids, blue-white light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Third line. My voice grew stronger. The ancient words rolled out with authority now, each syllable precisely pronounced. The vibration in the metal increased, spreading up my arms, into my chest. My heartbeat synchronized with it. Fourth line. The entire column was glowing now. I opened my eyes and saw light spreading through the carved pattern like liquid fire, racing along every line, filling every symbol. The galdrastafir was coming alive. Fifth line. The glow jumped from the central column to the surrounding support structures. Beams of light shot through the darkness, connecting steel to steel, creating a web of power through the building's skeleton. The maintenance room was bright as day now, but the light didn't hurt my eyes. It felt right, like seeing reality as it was meant to be seen. Sixth line. My voice was strong now, resonant, carrying harmonics that shouldn't be possible from a human throat. The building itself seemed to be speaking with me, its structure amplifying the invocation. The web of light grew more complex, more beautiful. Geometric patterns appearing in 3 dimensions, then 4, then more dimensions than I could count. I could see the boundaries now. The thin spots where reality was wearing through. Dark patches in the light where something else was pressing close, something hungry, something that had been asleep for so long it had forgotten what waking felt like, but was remembering now. Seventh line. The final words. I poured everything into them, all my intention, all my fear, all my desperate hope that this would work. The words left my mouth, and the universe listened. The light exploded outward, not violently, gently, like dawn breaking. Racing through every support beam, every wall, every floor. The entire building lit up with runic patterns that had never been visible before, but had always been there, waiting. And the world shifted. Not visibly. I was still standing in the same maintenance room, still holding the same metal column, still breathing the same stale air. But everything felt different, fundamentally different, more solid, more real, more present. It was like I'd been living my entire life slightly out of phase with reality, experiencing everything through a filter I hadn't known existed. And now, the filter was gone. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer. I could feel the weight of the air around me, the pressure of existence itself. The boundaries between things, between metal and air, between light and shadow, between possible and impossible, were distinct now in ways they'd never been before. As if reality had been slightly out of focus before and now had sharpened into perfect clarity. I could see the dimensional boundaries, not with my eyes, with something deeper. A sense I'd never had before, but now couldn't imagine living without. The walls between worlds were like glass panes, transparent but present, and they were holding, strong, stable. Where before there had been thin spots, weak points where the boundaries had worn dangerously thin, now there were reinforced structures. The galdrastafir wasn't just carved into the building. It had become part of the building's fundamental nature, written into its existence at a level deeper than physics. The glow from the runes faded to an almost imperceptible shimmer. Most people would never see it, but I could still feel them working. A pattern now woven into the building itself, running constantly like a program executing in an infinite loop. Checking boundaries, reinforcing weak spots, maintaining stability. Protecting reality from threats that existed in dimensions most people would never know about. Did it work? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Could feel the answer thrumming through every cell in my body. Halvard had his eyes closed, his expression concentrated. His massive hands were raised slightly, palms outward, as if reading something in the air. After a long moment, he opened his eyes. They were wet. This ancient being who'd lived for centuries, who'd seen empires rise and fall, who'd watched his own people fade into myth. He was crying. "Yes," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "The thin spot is stabilized. The boundaries are holding stronger than they have in 1,000 years. Whatever the small one's thinking servants might accidentally weaken, this pattern will counteract it. Reality is secure here. You've done something I didn't think was possible anymore. You've proven that the old knowledge and the new can work together, that humans can learn what we're losing, that maybe we're not facing extinction after all, just evolution. Here, just this building? It's a start. The prophecy described one working, one location. If this proves successful, the pattern can be replicated elsewhere. Other thin spots can be stabilized. But you've done what needed to be done. You've prevented a crisis that could have unraveled reality itself." We left the building as silently as we'd entered. Cameras experienced convenient malfunctions. Security guards happened to be on other floors. By the time we emerged into the cold December night, the solstice had passed. We'd done it. The next day at work, I couldn't stop noticing the building felt different, more solid somehow. And the runes, invisible to everyone else, glowed faintly in my peripheral vision. A constant reminder of what I'd learned, what I'd done, what I knew that no one else could ever know. Halvard caught my eye across the office, nodded slightly. Back to normal life, except nothing would ever be normal again. That was 3 months ago. The prophecy was right. AI development has accelerated rapidly since the solstice. Our company launched a new large language model last week. Other tech giants are racing to deploy increasingly powerful systems. The thinking servants are proliferating. But in Trondheim, at least, the dimensional boundaries hold. The working continues, invisible but constant. Reality remains stable despite the computational forces that might otherwise weaken it. Halvard and I still work together. By day, we're colleagues. By night, we're partners in a project to preserve runic knowledge before it's lost forever. The AI model I built has translated 40% more of the prophecy. We're learning what else might be coming, what other preparations might be needed, and I'm learning more runes, slowly becoming fluent in the language that shapes reality, discovering that code and magic were always the same thing, just different levels of abstraction. I haven't told anyone else, can't tell anyone. The secret has to stay hidden to stay safe, but I carry it with me. The knowledge that reality is more fragile than we think, that ancient warnings still matter. That technology and magic aren't opposites, but parallel attempts to accomplish the same thing, shaping the world through pattern and intention. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never gotten curious about Halvard's code. If I'd just let the mystery stay mysterious, I'd be happier probably. Ignorance is simpler, but I wouldn't trade this knowledge for anything. Because now I understand something fundamental that most people never will. We're not as advanced as we think we are. We're just rediscovering ancient knowledge in modern forms, and sometimes the old ways are still needed. The trolls aren't going extinct, not completely, as long as there are people willing to learn, to bridge the gap between ancient magic and modern technology, to understand that both are necessary, both are real, and both are just different ways of speaking to the underlying code of reality itself. That's what I tell myself on the days when the weight of the secret feels heavy. When I see tech companies pushing AI development further and further without understanding the consequences, when I wonder if more thin spots are weakening, if other dimensional boundaries are failing, if something else might cross over in places where no one thought to stabilize reality. But I'm doing what I can. Halvard and I are slowly identifying other thin spots, teaching a few trusted others the basics of runic work, creating a quiet network of people who can perform the necessary stabilizations, guardians of reality working in secret. Protecting boundaries most people don't know exist. It's not much, but it's something. And sometimes something is enough. The code runs, the runes glow, reality holds, and we continue our work, one line of code and one carved symbol at a time, building bridges between worlds, preserving knowledge that matters, keeping the boundaries secure. One impossible algorithm at a time.